I want a line of red-blooded American men right here. It is a sad state of affairs when a 16-year-old girl needs private security to come here and speak with you all today to feel safe.
I was scrolling on the tubes of you the other day, and I came across a video of some activists obnoxiously silencing a 16-year-old girl because she refused to play basketball against a boy. And as a mother of two girls, one 15 and one 11, it really caught my attention. And my mama heart just went out to this girl. I want to show you this video. It's from a YouTube channel called Undivided with Brandy Cruz. I think that's how you pronounce her name. I have never heard of this channel before. This is my first introduction to this channel. Maybe you guys have heard of her, but she's new to me. It's a politically conservative channel, and I've never seen any other video except this one. The reason why I want to highlight this is because these activists tried to silence this girl in the most obnoxious way, but I think their nonsense actually backfired because it caught my attention, right? And now I have a good excuse to make a video about their aggressive, progressive, nopey nonsense ideology. And now this girl has an even bigger platform to share her story on a larger scale. So nanny, nanny, boo-boo. For copyright reasons, I'm just gonna show you parts of this video to give you guys an idea of what the issue was, what she was trying to say. But then I wanna talk about a bigger, broader issue in this whole thing that I think can really help bring some clarity. But first, I'm gonna read this article to give you some context to what is happening in this video. What? The link that I had to read this article to you has been taken down. I have absolutely no information on why this was taken down. Interesting, but here's another article with the same information. Frances Stott, which is how I believe you say her last name, a 16-year-old athlete in Washington State, faces a civil rights complaint for refusing to play basketball against a boy, and she is fighting back. Good for her. Back in February, the Foundation Against Intolerance and Racism, or FAIR, filed a civil rights complaint on Frances's behalf to the Department of Education after the school district reportedly launched an investigation into Frances for misgendering her transgender opponent. On February 7th of 2025, after warming up for a game, Frances told her coach that she refused to play against the quite obvious male on the opposing team. Good for her. Her mom, Amy, says Frances approached the school athletic director, who responded that the school will not discriminate based on sexual identity in accordance with Washington state law. They released a statement on the controversy. We recognize that students and families hold diverse perspectives on various topics, including participation in athletics, and we respect the rights of individual students to make their personal decisions regarding their participation in athletic events. As a district, we remain committed to fostering an inclusive environment where all students feel safe, supported, and valued. Except Frances, apparently. Yesterday, Frances made news again when she spoke out about protecting girls' sports. She walked out to speak at a rally, and a group of men formed a protective circle around Frances so she could safely speak about having to compete against boys. This video that I'm going to show you is that rally. Activists tried to drown out her words with sirens, but Frances refused to be silent. Now, I really wish I could find that other article. It actually had a lot more information. It was very objective. So yeah, no clue what happened to that, but that's basically the gist of what's going on here. I'm going to show you the video and then give some commentary. But first, I just want you to listen to this. Listen to the aggression and the obnoxious behavior coming from these activists.
She sat out her final game of the year because a biological boy was playing on the other team.
You got it, Frances. You got it. You got it.
Good afternoon. My name is Frances Stout. Some of you may be aware of the journey I've embarked
Yeah, that siren in the background, that loud noise, those are the activists trying to silence this girl. I was so confused when I started this video because I'm like, why doesn't everybody just calm down? Why is everybody making so much noise? But then I realized, oh, they're trying to silence her. I mean, if this was my daughter, I don't know what I would do. This girl is so brave. But here's the thing. Thanks to technology, I was actually able to somewhat mute that background noise. So here's what it sounds like after I removed it.
On social media, I asked something of you last night. I said, send me your red-blooded American men.
You got it, Francis. You got it. You got it. It's loud.
Good afternoon. My name is Francis Stout. Some of you may be aware of the journey I've embarked on to bring attention to the lies that are being told in the state of Washington and very far beyond. We are being told that affirming gender care and dysphoria is helping our children, and those who listen to their gut feeling, which is telling them that it is wrong, are abusive. Washington is in desperate need of immediate intervention, as the individuals I previously mentioned will continue to do everything in their power to push radical gender ideology into schools, interfere with healthy family structures, silence free thinking and debate, remove religion from the public square, and threaten anyone who gets in their way with frivolous allegations and lawsuits. Biological men should not be participating in women's sports, and biological men and boys should not be in my locker room or my bathroom. You need to have the bravery to look a lie in the face and know that it is wrong and call it out for being so.
So while they're busy blasting horns and throwing their little tantrum, I can somewhat mute their little hissy fit so we can actually hear this 16-year-old explain why it's unfair for her to compete against a boy who's bigger and stronger than she is. I can even add captions to the parts I show. If you want to see the whole video, I will leave a link to the full video in the description. But like I said before, there's always something on YouTube that's gonna yell at me for copyright reasons. So this isn't some girl just being a homophobic bigot. This is a girl who's having her rights taken away. And to be fair, the more I learn about free speech, the more I learn about the West, the more I learn about this country. I love free speech. And I'm just going to give a hot take here that not everybody has to agree with me on. But they have the right to protest. They do. They have the right to disagree. Do I think that they are doing the mature thing by silencing this girl's free speech? No. But they have the right to protest. I believe that in America, your ability, your freedom to be able to freely say things needs to be protected, even if you don't like it. The more I learn about this, the more fundamental it becomes in why we have the freedoms that we have. Okay, but this is a good segue into highlighting a much bigger issue in the world. We have to ask ourselves, in fact, I think we're forced to ask ourselves a critical question. Why are these activists behaving so terribly? And this is very important to understand, okay? They think they are doing the right thing. They actually believe they are standing up for the oppressed by silencing this young lady. Now, I'm paraphrasing here, but my friend Natasha Crane once said that one of the best ways to find clarity in the chaos is that instead of trying to understand these smaller actions or beliefs, which can be completely overwhelming, it's wise to instead look at these actions and beliefs in terms of worldview. That way, we can truly understand why some people can stare at facts and blatantly ignore them. So, what is the activists' worldview? So the activists who attempted to silence Francis and many, many others, it's not just this group, they're everywhere, even to the point of violently silencing them or threatening violence. They operate from a postmodern progressive worldview shaped by gender ideology, or the core or the source of this ideology some people might recognize as critical theory. In this framework, truth is not seen as objective, but as something personally declared. So, for example, let's take gender. Okay, so gender in this worldview is not based on biological reality, but on individual identity claims. Their value of inclusion is very, very high. It's elevated as like the highest virtue, especially for those considered to be marginalized groups, like people of color, women, ironically, or those in the LGBTQ community, just to name a few. So in the critical theory worldview, society itself is divided into two main groups, oppressors and oppressed. And guess who the oppressors are? They are those who affirm biological distinctions between male and female. So Frances, this young girl, in other words, is looked at as the oppressor. Yeah, this young female who's forced to compete against someone bigger and stronger than her and is ridiculed and aggressively silenced when she speaks about this injustice is seen as the oppressor. The irony gets me every time I think about it. This creates a huge problem for these activists because if your worldview essentially divides people into two groups, the oppressors, who are always bad and evil, and then the oppressed, who are automatically seen as morally superior and possessing greater insight into truth and justice, then you can never allow yourself to question the oppressed side. You have to perpetually always remain a victim or an ally, or both, because the moment you rise above that and move forward, you risk stepping out of the category of the oppressed, because there's only one other category to step into, and they're the bad guys. They're trapped, because lifting yourself up and taking the chains off means giving up the one thing that this system rewards most, the badge of being oppressed. They are addicted to their own chains. They love their chains. I say that this is one reason why the victim mentality is so rampant. There's a social incentive to stay a victim. In fact, despite its origins as being a term of enlightenment, this is essentially what wokeness is. It's a promotion of victimhood. If the problem were actually solved, the oppressor category would shrink, and with it, the system that rewards victimhood. But since the framework requires an oppressor, someone new must always be cast in that role. This is why the postmodern progressive critical theory ideology must eventually devolve into a violent dystopian 1984 Brave New World totalitarian fever dream, because you have to force equity through violence. You must have equal outcome. You must dehumanize the oppressor in order to take them out. No oppressors means there can be no oppressed, only equity. They will forever be stuck in this myth of progressivism from this ideology, trying to solve a problem that they are creating. But this also helps explain why it grows and why so many people, especially high school and college students, become activists and feel the need to identify under the oppressed banner or become an ally because there's a social incentive with it. You are not seen as the bad guy. Now, I want to show you part of a video that, in my opinion, I think is the best explanation of this worldview and why they have their head in the sand. It's a video of a journalist named Melanie Phillips, and the context she is describing is within the framework of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, but her overall explanation fits like a glove with the progressive worldview. So take what she's saying and apply it to all these groups that I've been talking about that have adopted this worldview.
The Western liberal tells him or herself, I'm a good person because I'm liberal, and I'm liberal because I'm a good person, which means that I believe in things like the brotherhood of man, conscience and compassion, looking after the wretched of the world. These are all good things, and that's why I'm a liberal. One of the expressions of my goodness and my liberalism is that I support the Palestinian Arabs who I think are an oppressed people, and they are oppressed by the Israelis who have taken their land away from them, and they are oppressing them. Now, every part of that, in my view, is a lie. But put that to one side. This is what the liberal progressive thinks. Supporting the Palestinians is therefore something that makes the liberal progressive a good person. October 7 happened. And suddenly you have a situation in which the people that the liberal progressive has supported as being oppressed, and everything they do is a legitimate defense or resistance against oppression, suddenly we can see that those people have turned into the most bloodthirsty savages that could ever be imagined. Not just people who kill, but who slaughter in a sadistic, barbaric, debauched and depraved fashion that people can't imagine. The people that they have supported as being oppressed are good people because they're victims are these savages. And the people they have represented as oppressors are the victims. They can't have that. Because if they have that, if they admit that that is the case, then their entire worldview is shattered, because the cause they have supported as representing goodness is shown to be evil. And what does that make them? It makes them evil. So they can't have it. So they have to represent the Israelis as being at fault. The Israelis are to blame for what's happened. So there is no better way of blaming people than accusing them of the very thing they are the victim of. If the Israelis are Nazis, then we are free. We, the liberal West, are free of any kind of guilt. They are to blame. They are the people who are bad. We are free to continue with our fantasies of us being good people. And I think that's also what lay behind these amazing scenes that we saw on social media of people with their hands tearing down the posters of the hostages. Now you have to ask yourself, what's going through the mind of someone like that? They were pictures of babies, of children, of women who had been kidnapped by bloodthirsty monsters, and the faces of the people tearing them down were contorted very often with rage and hate. The very concept of the Israeli babies and children as victims of the people they had been supporting, because it contradicted the narrative on which they had hung their own moral worth. It's evil. And I think it is a symptom of the evil paths into which the West has fallen through its embrace of a whole range of ideologies, a whole range of thinking, which I think has come to define what we call the liberal progressive West.
Now, at the time that I'm recording this video, Palestine and Israel are currently in a ceasefire, but notice how these activists are silent. They're not cheering about it. It's because Israel is still seen as oppressors. That's a whole other video though. But I'm hoping that this will help people understand why terrorism is now basically protected by progressivism. I mean, New York might elect a socialist progressive Muslim mayor, the same city that had radical Muslim terrorists fly into the Twin Towers. That's where we are right now. You have people denying that that was terrorism on the part of Islam. I can't believe it. It reminds me of somebody who says that men are women and women can be men, denying the plain facts right in front of your face. That's what progressive ideology does. If you want to understand why the same group harassing this girl had pro-Palestine signs, Hamas head coverings, and LGBTQ flags all in the same crowd, look no further than critical theory worldview. For activists shaped by this worldview, all struggles of the oppressed are connected. In this mindset, every oppressed cause is linked together. That's why you'll see rainbow flags next to pro-Palestinian banners or climate justice protests mixed in with the anti-racist BLM fist, feminism, and gender activism. The term for this is intersectionality, another critical theory term. And the idea is simple. If one group is oppressed, then their struggle is automatically part of the same big fight against the oppressors, whether that means patriarchy, whiteness, Christianity, capitalism, colonialism, or what's the other word? Cis-normativity. I mean, that's just what I can remember. But that's why everyone who disagrees with them aren't just someone of a different opinion. No, they're racists. They're fascists. They're colonialists. They're hateful. They're bigots. They're evil. And they should be silenced. This is how they make Islam look like Christianity and Christianity look like Islam. It's how the color of your skin matters more than your character. It's how you leave out the Muslim terrorist story from the 9/11 attack. It's how they can call Jews Nazis. It's how they call evil good and good evil. But this highlights one of the worst parts of this worldview is that it actually hides and protects actual racists, actual bigots, and actual fascists. It protects them. When everyone who disagrees with the narrative gets slapped with those labels, the words lose their meaning. Real racism and real fascism get buried under all of these false accusations. And that makes it almost impossible to call out the actual dangerous people because the terms have been watered down and weaponized against anyone who doesn't conform. It creates injustice by making everything and everyone an oppressor. And that's how you end up with someone trying to silence a teenage girl speaking about fairness in sports while literally wearing a Hamas head covering. In their eyes, it's all one big giant battle against the oppressors. And here's the absolutely wild part, though. I just have to point this out because to see an LGBTQ flag next to a pro-Palestine activist is wild to me. Hamas, Islam, would never support transgender ideology. In Gaza, LGBTQ people can be jailed or even murdered. As a Christian, I see them made in the image of God who need to hear the gospel because I believe there's a better life for them, that God made them for something better. And what they're really looking for is Him. This is the biblical position of devoted Christians who love Scripture and love Jesus. But I'm called a homophobe for that. But Western activists still wave Hamas symbols because in this critical theory worldview, logic and consistency don't matter. What matters is being seen as part of the oppressed. It's toxic empathy at work. It excuses violence, shuts down truth, objective truth, as long as the ones doing it are labeled the victims. Because if you are against them, it looks like you are against people who are victimized. Okay, this is what this reminds me of. So I remember this one Parks and Rec satirical clip of a doomsday cult who called themselves the Reasonableists. Is that what they called themselves? Hold on, let me look this up real quick. That sounds about right. Yes, okay, it was the Reasonableists. I remember it because it was so ridiculous and brilliant. If you've been around my channel for any amount of time, you know how much I love researching cults and mind control. And I honestly thought this was one of the most brilliant satirical takes on cults that I've ever seen, okay? The name Reasonableists was intentionally chosen so that anyone who spoke out against the group would appear unreasonable and irrational.
Why does the cult call themselves the Reasonableists?
Well, they figure if people criticize them, it'll seem like they're attacking something very reasonable.
That's weirdly brilliant.
So if you label yourself a victim or an anti-racist or anti-fascist or anti-bullying, which is, by the way, the Trojan horse term for the LGBTQ activists to get into your schools. But then anybody who tries to come up against you is going to look like they're pro-fascism or pro-racism or pro-bullying or like they don't care about the victims. It's a trap. They automatically frame their critics as siding with oppression, even if all they're doing is speaking truth or asking questions. See how that works? Now let's move on to why they feel justified. Because of this worldview, activists do not interpret Frances's stance as simple disagreement. I talked about this a little bit before. The way that these activists see it, her stance is oppression, not just a difference of opinion. In their critical theory lens, in their worldview, words themselves can count as violence, but only for the oppressor. So when Frances speaks up, they don't just hear her sharing her view, they see it as a direct attack on transgender people. That's why blasting sirens and trying to drown her out isn't considered rude or wrong in their minds. They truly believe they are protecting the vulnerable. To them, this is justice. They don't see the hypocritical intolerance behind it. Words that express true, logically coherent ideas only cause violence to the uncritical mind because they are forced to think. And this is why they absolutely refuse, a lot of them refuse, to have an intellectually honest dialogue. Once you buy into the idea that disagreement is violence, you've basically shut down the ability to think critically or have meaningful conversations. That's exactly how cults operate, by the way. If you can control speech, you control thought. If you can slap the label of hate speech on free speech, then you can justify almost anything, even violence against the people you disagree with. That's why Frances needed protection. These activists genuinely believe they are victims, even while they're the ones harassing, silencing, and in extreme cases, even celebrating harm against others. To them, that feels heroic. I imagine, people think they could go back in time and think, wow, if I could take out Hitler, I would. If I could take out all those Nazis, I would. I would be a hero. If only these people understood all the good that I'd be doing by taking out all these people. That's kind of the mindset that they have. But what I don't think they critically consider is if that point of view is an error, then what will you look like? It reminds me of the Salem witch trials. I mean, they think that they're burning witches, but they forget they're standing in Salem. I mean, is everybody evil? They are the ones going around pointing at everybody, calling everybody a witch. Everybody's a Nazi that disagrees with them and gladly will burn them at the stake, and they think they're doing an honorable thing. But to them, it feels heroic. It's almost like these activists have this fantasy of being remembered as the good guys of history, like the civil rights leaders or other heroic figures that we look back on and admire for the changes they made. They want that legacy, but the irony is they've become something very different. They've become a bunch of Salem witch burners. Their behavior is entitled, insufferable, and deeply authoritarian. They push their ideas through propaganda and force, which is exactly how totalitarian systems have always taken shape. And here's one of the scary parts. In every totalitarian society of the past, people truly believed they were doing the right thing. They thought they were standing for justice, for equality, for progress. But in reality, they ended up becoming the very thing they claimed to be fighting against. Then there's the emotion. Emotional manipulation is central to this ideology. There's a lot of fallacies that people can commit. This one in particular is called the appeal to emotion fallacy. This is when somebody tries to win an argument by appealing to your emotion without using logic or facts. And boy, does this work. When you can put emotion in the place of reason, you are really going to think you're a good person. Emotional manipulation is central to this ideology. It can't run on logic because logic and objective truth would expose the contradictions, like claiming to stand for tolerance and women's rights while silencing a teenage girl whose rights are in danger. Instead, it runs on raw emotion, and activists are constantly told that if they don't act, then vulnerable people will be harmed or even die. And that kind of emotional pressure bypasses critical thinking and makes them feel like they are doing something virtuous. They are doing something about it. The outrage, the sirens, the shouting, it's all fueled by emotion, because if they stopped to reason it out, they would have to face some hard facts and truth. And that's something that would ultimately destroy their position and make them feel like they are heartless. Again, this is toxic empathy. Biblical compassion, by contrast, is never divorced from truth. I remember one time Jordan Peterson once said that it's necessary to engage in dialogue with those that you disagree with, because they're the ones who will tell you things you don't know. Dr. Robert Bowman, a well-respected Christian scholar who some of you might know from previous interviews I've done, has said something similar. But Dr. Bowman has expanded on why this is biblical to do. I made an entire video way back in the past. Video quality is not great, but it was a good video, where I dissected a post that Dr. Bowman made about this very topic. I will put a link to his post in the description. It's really good. Then there's the free speech issue. All right, lean into this part, because at the time I'm making this video, it is October of 2025. Because of the very predictable outcomes of this critical theory worldview, I'm pretty bummed out to say that with some degree of certainty, we will see more violence from the woke left. I like paying attention to patterns, and the pattern has shown that there will be more violence and more assassinations from the progressives, and it has a lot to do with their perspective on free speech. It's how these activists can justify silencing this girl and other people they see as oppressors and still say that they believe in free speech. They move the goalposts. Okay, so free speech to them isn't really seen as a universal right. Instead, it's like speech is divided into two categories, right? You have affirming speech, which are words that support the oppressed, right? They are protected, celebrated, and amplified. Then there's hate speech. This is anything that questions, critiques, or challenges the narrative. These things that are said, whatever these things are, fill in the blank. It gets labeled hate speech and is treated as dangerous, even violent. Things such as men are men, women are women, boys should not compete with girls, all white people aren't racist, math is not racist. Jesus Christ is the only way to be saved. You are not a victim. You can do anything that you put your mind to, because we live in America, the best country on the planet. I love America. Yes, I believe homosexuality is a sexual sin. God loves you more than you could ever realize and wants way better for you. He is what you are looking for. Repent and believe. All of this would be considered violent hate speech. This is why you've been hearing lately that words are violence. This is why violence is a feature of progressivism. So silencing what they call hate speech isn't seen as censorship in their eyes. It's seen as a moral duty. They honestly believe that restricting certain voices protects vulnerable groups. In their framework, free speech must always be limited if it risks harming the oppressed. This is why, by the way, what I said in the beginning still stands. This is why true advocates of free speech must allow for all speech. Okay, now keep in mind, one thing that this crowd really likes to say is you can believe in whatever you want as long as you don't harm others, right? So do you see how this has been redefined? What Christians say in particular is seen as not just hateful, but harmful. Here's the irony. Once you redefine disagreement as violence, free speech becomes impossible, because the only ones allowed are the ones who already agree. So they're over here calling everyone a fascist, yet they're the ones silencing the opposition. a key feature of fascism. But that fact falls short for the reasons I shared before. Just remember this, that it's not truth that fears exposure, it's lies. So a big telltale sign of if you are being manipulated or not is to look and see if you are actually able to examine opposing positions to find out what's actually true without consequence. And by the way, this doesn't give you permission to make outlandish conspiracy theories that are unfounded and make you look crazy. There's a difference between delusion and discernment. And just because somebody with a platform says something doesn't make it true. You need to test what they say. Let me add two more very interesting layers here. Let's start with the first layer of progressive Christianity. Here, you see exactly why there's such a divide within the Christian world over this ideology. On one side, you have progressive Christians who've adopted this critical theory lens where truth can't be known, right? They're postmodern. And on the other side, you have biblical Christians who hold to a worldview rooted in scripture and objective truth. This, by the way, is also why Christians just so happen to end up aligning with conservative values. Not because they're trying to be political, but because those values are built on moral principles that line up with the Bible and with reality. I mean, I'll just be real with you guys. I got issues with both sides of the spectrum. I mean, we have the woke right coming out swinging, and we need to call that out. And there's certain levels of Republican politics that I can't get behind just because it's politics. What do they call it? Godless conservatism. Okay, so there's some conversations to be had about that. But that's one really big key point. How you define truth will determine how you shape your morality. If objective truth exists, that means objective morality does too. This is natural law, right? But to a progressive, truth and morality are fluid and are interpreted through the eyes of the oppressed. Progressive Christians who think they're doing something moral end up taking this secular worldview and forcing it into the Bible. They put words into Jesus's mouth and reframe him as some kind of super socialist, social justice teddy bear Jesus, a version of him that looks nothing like the biblical one. But because they still want the name Christian, they create an alternative version of Christianity altogether, hence progressive Christianity. And for all the reasons that I gave before about emotion and empathy, they feel like this is the higher moral ground. They think this is the biblical standard. The irony is, though, at its core, because it's a critical theory lens that they have put on the Bible, the worldview isn't biblical. Again, it's postmodern critical theory with Christianity slapped onto it, and it ties directly back to what I said earlier about not wanting to be seen as an oppressor. If Christianity itself is labeled oppressive, then to them, the solution in this system is to redefine Christianity. So you can still call yourself a Christian while also being an ally to the supposed oppressed. They truly believe they're improving Christianity by doing this. Then there's the second layer here that I think is very disturbing and very tough to ignore. The Islamic connection. I've kind of hinted at this throughout the video, but taking everything that we've gone over, putting the ideology aside for just a second, I want to talk about the strategic overlap between this progressive ideology and Islam. And it's pretty wild when you think about it. There is this strange alliance between progressive activists and certain Islamist movements that makes no real sense on the surface, but it works for one reason. They share a common enemy, the West. Both see Western civilization, especially anything rooted in Christianity, as needing to be torn down, right? For progressives, it's about deconstructing power and achieving equity. It's taking down the oppressors, right? And so for the Islamists, it's about replacing Western influence with Islamic authority. This is why some Muslims quietly call these activists useful idiots. This is an actual term. This term actually comes from the Cold War era. This is not a term that I'm using for them. It's a term that's been given to them by the people who are taking advantage of them. So what are useful idiots? Okay, useful idiots were described as well-intended Western activists who were so focused on opposing capitalism or the West that they unknowingly advanced Soviet or authoritarian interests. Today, some Muslim leaders use that same phrase to describe progressive Western allies. These are the people who scream the loudest about oppression or colonialism or Christian nationalism without realizing their activism is weakening the very societies that give them freedom of speech, women's rights, and equality in the first place. They have paved the way for Muslim nationalism. These activists are loud, emotional, and easy to manipulate because they think they're standing for justice, but they've actually helped dismantle the very freedoms that allow them to protest in the first place. It's a temporary alliance built on shared outrage, not shared values. And once the common enemy is gone, they will turn on each other in a heartbeat. It reminds me of Jafar from Aladdin, because I'm 8. Aladdin was the useful idiot, and once Jafar got what he wanted, he didn't care what happened to Aladdin. Now, let me compare this to the Christian worldview and give you some solutions. First, Christianity approaches the situation very differently. Christianity affirms that truth is objective and grounded in God's design. Humanity is created male and female, and reality is not determined by personal feelings. I mean, sometimes it aligns together with that, but ultimately, reality is higher. It's defined first and then flowed from there. The Christian worldview says that everybody is made in God's image, even those activists. They need our prayers. They possess dignity and worth as well. This goes for Frances, everybody at that rally, including those who disagree with her. Love, from a biblical perspective, cannot be separated from truth. This is 1 Corinthians 13 stuff. True love, it says, delights in truth. So to love someone does not mean affirming lies for their comfort. As hard as that might be, that's what real love is. This reveals the stark difference between these two worldviews. The activist worldview sees disagreement as violence and silencing as a moral duty. The Christian worldview sees truth as real, dignity is God-given, with courage. In this case, Frances's decision, this young girl, her decision not to compete against a boy reflects a commitment to fairness and safety in girls' sports, which aligns with the Christian call to uphold both truth and love, to love your neighbor. This is what it means to love your neighbor. Your neighbor is everybody. So while they're over here trying to love the transgender person, they completely neglect what it means to love the girl whose rights are being infringed upon. They want to have empathy for one, but not the other. Progressive love is not about loving everybody. It's about hating the right people. It's empathy for this person, but not for this person. So this clash is bigger than just sports. It's not just about sports. It's about worldviews and which one society will live by, one rooted in subjective identity or one grounded in objective truth. And in fact, part of the reason why we're seeing such progressive ideology shoved in our face is that people have traded the truth for a lie. They have instead worshiped creation instead of the creator. People have started looking inward and seeing themselves as an authority. And in some cases, you should do that. We should be able to reason with the world around us and assess reality and make decisions. But that's not what I'm talking about here. This is people turning their back on God and claiming they are now the authority of what's true and what's not. So what now? I'm going to do my best to give you what I think are ways that we can combat this. First, hold, cling to, never let go of objective truth. Anybody who has not read 1984 by George Orwell can deeply understand how important this is. The progressive worldview crumbles, collapses because it's built on shifting feelings instead of reality. It's built on lies. This is why it has an expiration date. It's why socialism doesn't work. It's why totalitarianism ultimately is overcome. Our response must stay rooted in biological, moral, and biblical truth. That means refusing to play these games of oppressor versus oppressed. It's affirming that truth exists outside of us and submitting to it, whether we like it or not. Second thing I'll tell you is defend free speech. Like I said, the more I learn about free speech, the more I will defend it. They want to silence and label hate speech. And guys, listen, okay? The solution is not to silence them back. I interviewed Dr. Mauser, one of my professors at Southern Evangelical Seminary, about this, about what fascism actually is. So double down on defending free speech for everyone, even for those we disagree with. If we don't, we end up adopting the same totalitarian instincts. Don't fall for this, okay? Because remember that truth doesn't fear investigation. Then I'll say model grace with conviction. We can't let this frustration drive us into hatred. Say even the worst happens, okay? That some of us, more of us, get killed for this, okay? Will you pray for your enemy? If Jesus could pray for the people torturing and murdering him, we can pray for those who hate us. This does not mean that we lose our backbone, though. We are called to speak truth with love. That does not mean watering down truth. It does mean treating people as image bearers of God. Call out evil. Don't shrink back on telling people to repent and come to the Lord. Do it with a straight spine and your chest out, but do it with the fear of the Lord in your heart. Do not become like your enemy in order to overcome your enemy. Then I'll say expose contradictions calmly, okay? Much of this ideology, it collapses under its own weight. Lies never outlive the truth, especially historically speaking. That's why it never stands. This is why socialism doesn't stand. Totalitarianism. The truth is always louder. The light is always brighter. It's a house divided against itself. I mean, guys, activists are flying both the rainbow flag and the Hamas flag without realizing the contradiction, and we can calmly point this out. It's more effective than shouting. It forces others to see the illogic for themselves, even if they don't accept it. But don't match their treatment. Rise above it. You pray for those who hate you. This is love. And the thing is that I'm going over all of this so that you can understand and know better, because when we know better, we do better. And it helps us take down our defenses when we can understand the why, right? Like why somebody else is behaving the way they are and believing what they do. It's wisdom to understand so you can have more peace and be more Christ-like. It gives us confidence in why we believe what we do. The last thing I'm going to give here is a slight expansion on everything I shared and to give a caution, maybe a warning to my fellow Christians, okay? Because as we push back against these destructive ideologies, I've alluded a little bit to this before, but we can't let the pendulum swing so far the other way that we end up becoming what we're trying to expose. Right? I talked about this a little bit before. You don't fight darkness by using the same weapons. You don't defeat deception by adopting those tactics. What I try to remember is that grace, charity, love, all combined with truth, are signs of spiritual maturity, not compromise. It's strange to me that when a believer speaks boldly with grace and patience, some Christians accuse them of being soft or afraid to stand for truth. I wholeheartedly disagree. I think that we are becoming afraid, right? I think that we're becoming afraid of looking loving. It's what scripture says, have nothing to do with foolish, ignorant controversies because they breed quarrels. The Lord's servant must not be quarrelsome. Look, it's 2 Timothy. I'll look it up. 2 Timothy 2:23-26 have nothing to do with foolish, ignorant controversies. They breed quarrels. The Lord's servant must not be quarrelsome, but kind to everyone, able to teach, patiently enduring evil, correcting his opponents with gentleness. God may perhaps grant them repentance, leading to a knowledge of the truth, and they may come to their senses and escape the snare of the devil after being captured by him to do his will. You can speak truth and not be a jerk, and you can be kind about it without compromising. If you run into a jerk in the morning, then you just ran into a jerk. But if you run into jerks all day long, then the chances are you're the jerk. I mean, we don't want to be a part of the problem. And here's the thing. This is exactly how the progressive ideology spread in the first place. People got swept up in their emotional outrage. They were manipulated into believing that their anger was righteous, that their tribalism was moral, and that silencing their opponents was justice. And that's the deception. It's how hearts get hardened without realizing it. And if we're not careful, I think we can fall into the same trap. I don't want to live in fear. And I don't want my heart to grow hard. I will continue to love those I disagree with and pray for those who hate me, but I'll do it with a backbone. I don't want to play footsie cakes with these squishy and dangerous ideologies. I may be angry at times, but I refuse to let that anger take root and turn into bitterness, because the moment we start fighting darkness with darkness, we lose sight of the light that we are supposed to carry. Jesus is the light, and he's also the truth. This is why the world has always hated him. So here's the bottom line, and I will end with this. The core issue really comes down to truth. A more bird's eye view of progressive ideology is that they are trying to make heaven on earth its own Eden, but it's like the anti-Eden. If you take away God as the standard, right, outside of yourself, if you remove the idea of an objective truth rooted in a sovereign, all-powerful creator, then suddenly everything shifts. Humanity becomes its own authority. And that opens the door to progressive propaganda, where truth just evolves with whatever people feel in the moment. The problem is that this worldview has no anchor. It's anchored in whoever has the most power. Morality is always shifting, and what's celebrated as virtuous today can be condemned tomorrow. And that's why it leans so heavily on propaganda, outrage, and emotional manipulation. It has to keep manufacturing unity around a truth that doesn't actually exist outside of human opinion, which is a house on sand. Jesus says in scripture, he's the firm foundation. And when you stand firm on something outside of yourself, on God's unchanging standard, you have a foundation that doesn't move. Doubling down on that objective truth, it's what's sustainable, it's what's good, it's what's right, and what actually holds society together. God's truth doesn't change with culture. And because of that, it's the only foundation strong enough to support real justice, real compassion, and true human dignity. So I hope that I've put a few stones in some shoes. Those are my thoughts on that. It won't be the last time I talk about this topic because I think that it's just taking over. It's not going anywhere anytime soon. Please be sure to check out the description and let me know what you think in the comments.